Thank you for joining us on Sozo Firm Insights with our host, Andrew Jensen.
From denial to disciplined action, how colleges begin the work that actually changes outcomes. For colleges and universities in distress, the most difficult step is not making cuts, restructuring programs, or pursuing partnerships. It is crossing the invisible line between denial and disciplined action. Many institutions spend years circling the same conversations, acknowledging challenges in abstract terms while postponing decisions that would force real change. When action finally occurs, it is often reactive, rushed, and shaped by crisis rather than intention. Yet some institutions do manage to interrupt this pattern. They do not escape pressure, but they change how they respond to it. The difference lies not in the availability of data or advice, but in the willingness to adopt a fundamentally different mode of decision making, the moment of recognition. Movement out of denial begins when leaders stop treating problems as anomalies and start naming them as structural. This shift is subtle but profound. Instead of asking, how do we recover enrollment next year? Institutions ask, what level of enrollment is realistically sustainable and what does that imply? Instead of hoping that conditions will improve, leaders accept that waiting is itself a choice with consequences. This moment rarely feels like clarity, it feels like loss, the loss of comforting narratives and familiar assumptions. But it is also the point at which agency returns. Reframing responsibility. One of the most important changes institutions make is redefining what responsible leadership looks like. In denial, responsibility is framed as preservation, protecting programs, jobs, traditions, and morale. In disciplined action, responsibility is reframed as stewardship of the institution's future, even if that future looks different from its past. This reframing allows leaders to say difficult things without positioning themselves as adversaries of the mission. Change is no longer about abandoning values, it is about sustaining them under new conditions. Slowing down to speed up. Ironically, institutions often move from denial to action by slowing down first. Disciplined action is not impulsive. It resists the urge to announce initiatives before understanding the problem. This phase involves rigorous diagnosis, honest assessment of enrollment trends and net revenue, program level analysis of demand, cost, and contribution, clear understanding of fixed versus flexible costs, realistic evaluation of institutional distinctiveness. Crucially, this work is done with the explicit intent to inform decisions, not merely to document conditions. Creating a small set of non negotiable priorities. Institutions stuck in denial often have long lists of priorities and no clear hierarchy. Disciplined action begins by narrowing focus. Effective leadership teams identify a small number of non negotiable objectives, often no more than 3, that will guide decisions for the next several years. These objectives are not aspirational slogans, they are concrete commitments, such as achieving a defined operating margin, stabilizing enrollment at a specific level, or aligning programs with clearly articulated student outcomes. Everything else becomes secondary. Aligning governance around reality. Boards play a pivotal role in the transition from denial to discipline. In denial, boards often receive curated information designed to reassure. In disciplined action, boards demand and tolerate candor. This requires a shift in board culture, from consensus seeking to inquiry driven governance. Trustees ask harder questions, request scenario planning, and focus less on avoiding discomfort and more on preserving long term viability. When boards model seriousness and curiosity rather than panic or avoidance, they create space for leadership to act. Making decisions that signal change is real. Institutions escape denial not when they announce new plans, but when they make their first unmistakable trade off. This might involve sunsetting a program, consolidating administrative functions, redefining faculty roles, or reallocating resources away from legacy activities. These decisions matter less for their immediate financial impact than for what they signal. They demonstrate that leadership is willing to choose and that the era of symbolic change is over. Without such signals, skepticism persists and momentum fades. Managing the human dimension honestly. Disciplined action does not ignore the human cost of change. On the contrary, it treats that cost with seriousness and respect. Leaders who succeed in this phase communicate early and often. They avoid sugarcoating reality while also avoiding performative toughness. They acknowledge fear, grief, and anger as legitimate responses. Importantly, they distinguish between empathy and avoidance. Compassion does not require postponing decisions that ultimately make outcomes worse. Building capacity for ongoing adaptation. One of the most common mistakes institutions make is treating disciplined action as a one-time corrective effort. In reality, the transition from denial marks the beginning of a new operating posture. Institutions that stabilize build mechanisms for ongoing review and adjustment. They monitor enrollment and finances continuously, revisit program portfolios regularly, and treat strategy as a living discipline rather than a periodic exercise. This posture reduces the likelihood of returning to denial when conditions shift again. Leadership beyond personality. In denial, institutions often search for the right leader to fix problems. In disciplined action, they recognize that leadership is as much about structure and process as personality. Clear decision rights, transparent metrics, and aligned incentives matter more than charisma. Disciplined institutions reduce reliance on heroics and increase reliance on systems that support tough choices. This makes change more durable and less dependent on individual tenure. Why this transition is so rare and so valuable. Moving from denial to disciplined action is rare because it requires institutions to tolerate discomfort without the immediate relief of resolution. It requires leaders and boards to sit with ambiguity, make imperfect decisions, and accept criticism. But it is also the moment when institutions reclaim control over their futures. Colleges that make this transition may still shrink, merge, or fundamentally change, but they do so with intention rather than surprise, and with a greater ability to protect students, faculty, and mission. Discipline as a form of hope. Disciplined action is often mistaken for pessimism. In reality, it is a form of grounded hope. The belief that honest engagement with reality creates more possibility than denial ever could. Institutions do not fail because conditions change. They fail because they delay adapting to those changes. The path out of denial is not easy, but it is clear. Name reality, choose priorities, make trade-offs, act with discipline, repeat. For institutions willing to do this work, the future remains open.
You've been listening to Sozo Firm Insights. For over 20 years, we've been providing strategic growth and leadership insights for businesses, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and higher education institutions. Thank you for joining us.